I had exactly 72 hours to pay $500,000 in lake fees for the lake I legally owned, or according to the letter taped to my door, things would get messy. 3 days earlier, someone had slipped an anonymous note into my mailbox that simply said, "Sell the lake or regret it." And by the time the handcuffs finally clicked around the HOA president's wrists, I understood exactly how far she'd been willing to go. My name is Daniel Crawford, and I thought I'd bought myself peace. When I signed the deed to Cedar Lake, a quiet 12-acre stretch of water tucked behind my home in Colorado, I imagined mornings spent fishing off my dock, maybe letting my wife Rachel read in the boathouse while the sun lifted over the trees. I didn't picture myself building evidence folders or studying HOA bylaws like they were ancient runes. But the thing about peace is that sometimes it draws predators. And mine showed up at 6:47 on a cold morning wearing high heels and a smile sharp enough to peel bark off a tree. I remember hearing those footsteps first, sharp little clicks across the wooden planks of my private dock. I turned around and saw her, Margaret Thornton, president of the Lakeview Meadows HOA, wrapped in a cream-colored blazer, even though the morning air could have frozen a river. She held a folded paper like she was serving me a warrant. I should have known from the way she stood chin high, shoulders squared, that she thought she owned the place. "Mr. Crawford," she said, handing me the paper without asking if she could step onto my dock, "your payment is overdue." I opened the invoice and felt my eyebrows climb. Lake usage fee $250 a month, totaling $505, $250 due immediately. Failure to comply will result in removal from community property. I laughed, thinking it had to be some kind of absurd prank. "I own this lake," I told her. "The water, the land beneath it, everything. You can't charge me to use my own property." Her smile didn't budge. "This lake has been part of our community for 30 years. Your deed doesn't erase that tradition." Tradition. That was her word for trespassing. She turned on her heel and told me to show up next Thursday at 7 p.m. to explain myself. The way she said "explain myself" made it sound like I'd been caught stealing lunch money at school. After she left, I noticed something I'd brushed off before a black SUV parked on the gravel road above the tree-line logo on the side Ridgewater development. At the time, it meant nothing to me. I took a photo just out of habit. I have worked for the EPA for 15 years, and documenting everything, every oddity, every inconsistency is pretty much muscle memory. Within the week, the games began. First came an email from the HOA accusing me of blocking access to communal water features, citing a bylaw that, when I looked it up, applied to shared parking lots. Then came a $150 per day fine for restricting community use. Then came the community message board, where Margaret wrote a poetic little speech about how I was destroying decades of cherished family traditions. A few residents piled on, calling me selfish, greedy, and outsider. I wasn't surprised they only knew what she fed them. But the first moment I felt something stronger than irritation was the morning I saw 4 kayaks gliding across the lake. They weren't malicious, just misguided. One guy told me Margaret had said the lake wasn't really mine. I didn't shout. I just recorded the conversation on my phone to save for later. It was around that time my wife showed me Margaret's latest post. They were calling me the guy who hates kids, lake hog, even tyrant. And that's when something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't just annoyance. This was a coordinated push. Still, I thought I could fix it with paperwork. That illusion died the night someone in a hoodie slid an envelope into my mailbox at 11:23 p.m., caught on my security camera. The note inside had 5 words: "Sell the lake or regret it." And behind the hooded figure, just barely visible, a dark sedan with a dent over the left taillight. One I had seen before right outside Margaret's house. I barely slept that night. I have never been scared of confrontation, but this wasn't confrontation. This was coercion. And then the break came from a stranger. I met him walking back from my mailbox. Tall, white-haired, straight-backed, like someone who had spent decades behind a bench and knew how to read a person in one glance. "I'm Gregory," he said. Gregory Wallace. Turned out he had spent decades behind a bench, a retired county judge. Margaret's done this before, he told me as we sat in my living room. 2 families, one after the other. Different excuses, violations, fees, social pressure. They sold at a loss. Their land was purchased by companies tied to her husband. His words hit me hard. I'd suspected manipulation. I hadn't suspected a system. Over the next days, I found documents confirming Margaret had tried to buy Cedar Lake years before I did, and Walter, the previous owner, told her absolutely not. The HOA minutes even had a note President Thornton to explore alternative options. Alternative options apparently meant coercion. She doubled down soon after, marched onto my land with 15 residents pretending there was a public easement. There wasn't. And when I told her a licensed surveyor was coming, some of the residents behind her looked like they'd swallowed cold soup. It was the first time I realized not everyone was following her willingly. But the hit that knocked the wind out of me came in private, when the weight of all this finally pressed down. I remember Rachel asking if we were going to be okay, and for the first time I didn't know. I sat at my desk looking at my evidence folder named HOA Dispute and felt embarrassingly small, like I'd walked into something bigger than me. I wondered if I should have just let the kayaks go, or ignored the invoice, or tried harder to be neighborly. Doubt is dangerous. It seeps in quiet. And for a moment, I genuinely considered giving up. But the universe sent me a reminder that villains slip eventually. It came in the form of a woman knocking on my door. Sandra Collins, one of Margaret's own board members. She looked nervous, like she expected someone to follow her. She handed me a flash drive and said, "You need to see what she's been doing." 23 emails. A 4-month chain. Plans, timelines, numbers. Ridgewater Development offering $2.1 million for the lake if the HOA could grab it first. A projected profit of $12.5 million on a townhouse development. And a letter from Gerald Thornton, Margaret's husband, promising an 8% commission if he could facilitate the acquisition. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fines, the pressure, the posts, the manufactured outrage. They weren't trying to protect a tradition. They were trying to flip my lake like it was a house on a reality TV show. I hired a real estate attorney the next morning, and the next HOA meeting. That was the night everything cracked. The community center was packed 60-something residents, all squeezed into metal folding chairs. Margaret stood at the front with a projector clicking through slides that painted me as some villain hoarding community heritage. Then she unveiled her masterpiece, Resolution 2024-07, forcing me to sell the lake to the HOA for $300,000. When she invited me to defend myself, I didn't say a word. I plugged my laptop into the projector and pulled up the county survey map, clear boundary lines, showing Cedar Lake miles outside the HOA. Then I pulled up the HOA's own jurisdiction map. Side by side, undeniable. Whispers rippled through the room. A woman raised her hand asking why Margaret never mentioned this. Margaret's smile wavered for the first time. Then Gregory stood. His voice was steady, slicing right through the murmurs. What is Ridgewater Development's interest in Cedar Lake? And why is their vehicle visiting Mr. Crawford's property? Margaret hesitated. The hesitation said everything. The vote happened anyway. 34 for 28 against. A rigged mandate. But the cracks were visible now, faces shifting, trust wobbling. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Sandra approached me in the parking lot with those emails in her hand saying, "She threatened us too." And suddenly I wasn't alone in this. From there, things moved fast. My attorney filed complaints. Deputy Barnes, the sheriff's deputy who took the anonymous letter, started connecting dots. And Ridgewater Development, when subpoenaed, folded instantly, handing over documents that exposed a decade-long scheme across multiple communities. What Margaret had done to me, she'd done before, successfully. The final showdown came at a Saturday town hall meeting. The place was overflowing, tension thicker than lake mud. Margaret opened with her usual speech about protecting the community, but nobody clapped this time. People were staring at their shoes, their phones anywhere but her. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I put 3 documents on the screen. The letter of intent with Gerald's signature. Margaret's email planning to seize the lake before I ever bought it. Ridgewater's internal notes praising Gerald for previous successful acquisitions. Silence. Then voices. Then shouting. A woman stood and demanded Margaret answer whether she knew about the deal. Margaret cracked. She insisted she did it for the neighborhood, that the profit would have stayed within the community, that I was overreacting. Gregory stepped forward and told everyone he had verified every document. And that's when Gerald tried to slip out the side door. Too late. 2 men in dark suits, FBI, were already waiting. Deputy Barnes walked in from the back. The room parted like someone had dropped a boulder into it. Margaret Thornton and Gerald Thornton. One agent said, voice carrying through the hall, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and mail fraud." Margaret didn't fight. She just stared at me like I'd broken some unwritten rule. Gerald's face, on the other hand, crumpled like wet paper. The cuffs clicked. The room watched. And just like that, the woman who had strutted onto my dock with a fake invoice was being led out past the same people she once commanded like chess pieces. She looked back at me once and said, "You think you won. You don't understand what you've inherited." But the funny thing is, I did. I inherited my peace back. And that's where my story ends. Not with champagne or neighbors apologizing or some sentimental group hug. Just the image of Margaret and Gerald being escorted out of that community center and the quiet that finally settled over Cedar Lake after months of noise. In the end, the lesson is simple. When you stand your ground against bullies, they eventually trip over their own lies.